The glass door of Sal's diner shattered inward at exactly 3:22 in the morning. Not from force. From the weight of a woman who could barely stand. Elena Voss, 29 years old but looking like she had already lived several lifetimes, stumbled across the black and white checkered floor with one hand pressed against her torn nanny uniform. Blood seeped through the fabric in thin, steady rivulets. Her shoulder was exposed, the skin beneath bruised the color of rotting fruit. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her pale face. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, like a wounded animal learning how to survive the next 5 seconds. The diner was nearly empty. A waitress with tired eyes and a face that had seen too much suffering stood behind the counter, frozen. 3 booths sat dark and abandoned. And in the corner booth, perfectly still in the shadows, sat a man who owned the very air around him. Nico Moreno. 47 years old. Salt and pepper hair swept back with precision. A charcoal suit that cost more than Aria's annual salary, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His hands rested flat on the table. His eyes were dark and still and ancient. The kind of eyes that had watched men die and never flinched. The kind of eyes that knew exactly what they were looking at. 2 men stood near the counter. Tony and Franco. Nico's lieutenants for 15 years. When they saw Aria stumble through that door, both of them went rigid. Their hands moved instinctively toward their jackets. But Nico did not move. He simply watched. Then the kitchen door burst open. 4 men in leather jackets moved like they owned the space. They blocked the entrance. Their faces were hard and empty. Behind them, a young delivery driver cowered against the industrial refrigerator, his uniform torn, his lips split and bleeding. He could not have been more than 19. Aria. The first man's voice dripped with something that was not quite human. You've been a very difficult woman to find. She knew that voice. Anthony Marchetti. The man who had owned the apartment where she slept. The man who had extracted payment through invasions and threats that left her fractured in ways that had nothing to do with bones. 8 years of owing him money she did not have. 8 years of listening to him list her debts like he was reciting scripture. Aria's hands trembled. She looked down at her feet. The checkered floor seemed to stretch for miles. Her pocket had torn open when she ran. 2 crumpled dollar bills lay on the floor, curled like dying leaves. $2. That was everything. That was the difference between eating for 2 more days or starving. That was her entire world, expressed in the currency of survival. You're coming back with us, Marchetti said. His men moved closer. The sound of their boots on the tile floor was like the ticking of a clock counting down to something irreversible. You're going to settle this debt. One way or another. The young delivery driver whimpered. Aria looked at him. Really looked at him. He was terrified. His eyes were wide and wet with tears. He was just a kid. He had probably taken this delivery route to feed his family. He had probably done nothing wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong moment. She stepped between him and the 4 men. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was steady. Trembling like a candle in the wind, but steady. Leave him alone. He's just a kid. The men laughed. The sound was cruel and empty, like the laugh of something that had forgotten how to be human. You're in no position to negotiate, Aria, Marchetti said. You owe me $300,000 in 2 weeks. You think stepping in front of a child is going to change that? You think your life is worth saving? She did not answer. She just stood there between them and the boy, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, her hand still shaking but her spine refusing to bend. The neon sign above the counter buzzed and crackled. The smell of stale coffee and grease hung so thick in the air it felt like drowning. The waitress behind the counter had gone absolutely white. Her hands gripped the edge of the register so hard her knuckles turned the color of bone. In the corner booth, Nico Moreno watched. He did not move. He did not speak. He did not give any outward sign that he was interested in what was happening in the center of his diner. But his lieutenants felt the shift. They felt the temperature of the room change. In 15 years of working for him, they had learned to read the silence. And this silence was not empty. This silence was the moment before everything changed. Tony and Franco exchanged a look. A single glance that passed between them like electricity. Marchetti stepped forward. His men fanned out. The young delivery driver pressed himself harder against the refrigerator, trying to disappear into the metal, trying to become nothing. "You have two options," Marchetti said to Aria. "Come with me now, or I take the kid instead. You choose. You choose who pays the price for your debts." The clock on the wall ticked. 1 second. 2 seconds. The buzzing neon sign crackled and hissed like something alive and hungry. And Elena Voss, who had nothing, who had less than nothing, who had already lost everything that mattered, stepped even closer to the boy. "I choose neither," she said. Her voice was shattered glass. It was a prayer. It was the last defiance of someone with nothing left to lose. The men moved. They actually laughed and moved toward her and the boy, and the sound of their boots on the checkered floor was like the closing of a coffin lid. But what happened next was something that would circle back through Chicago's underworld like a curse that could not be contained. Nico Moreno stood up. He did not stand quickly. He stood the way a god might stand if there was a god and the god had decided it was time to speak. Tony and Franco moved simultaneously, crossing the diner without making a sound. They moved like ghosts. Like blades wrapped in ice. Their movements were so fluid, so practiced, so absolutely final that the four men in leather jackets froze mid-step. Marchetti's face went pale. "Mr. Moreno," he began, and his voice had lost all of its cruelty. It had become small and thin, like the voice of a child who had just realized he had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Nico did not speak. He simply looked at the man. His eyes were patient and cold and infinite. I did not know you were." Marchetti stammered, backing toward the door, his men scrambling behind him, their faces ashen. "Get out," Nico said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Like the sound of something final. "And know that if you ever come near her again, you will understand what it means to have already died and still be breathing." They ran. The four men in leather jackets and Anthony Marchetti ran from the diner like it was on fire. Like the ground itself had become dangerous beneath their feet. The glass door swung open and then slammed shut behind them. The neon sign buzzed. The clock ticked. The waitress behind the counter slowly released her grip on the register. Nico Moreno turned to look at Aria. Just looked at her. His eyes moved across her torn uniform, her exposed bruises, her bleeding shoulder, the $2 bills on the checkered floor. His expression did not change. But something deep inside his chest shifted. Something that had been still for a very long time moved. She was shaking. Her legs were giving out. She sank toward the nearest booth, and Franco moved without being asked, catching her arm, steadying her, helping her sit down. "Get her water," Nico said to Tony. "And the first aid kit." He sat across from her. Not next to her. Across from her, the way you might sit if you were speaking to someone and you wanted them to understand that what you were saying mattered. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena Voss," she whispered. She was looking at the $2 bills on the checkered floor. They seemed very small. Very fragile. Like they were the only true things in the entire diner, and everything else was a shadow or a dream. "Those are mine," she said. Her voice broke. "That is all I have. That is everything." Nico did not look at the money. He looked at her. "Not anymore," he said. But what she did not know was that in one moment, in one act of courage when she had every reason to collapse, she had just shown him something he thought the world had killed. She had shown him a reason to become something other than what he was. She did not know that those $2 bills would become the reason 20 limousines would arrive at the Langford mansion by dawn. She did not know that Sophie Langford, the woman who employed her as a nanny, the woman who had complained about her only days before as a problematic employee, had just sealed her own fate. But that story was still waiting. First, they had to go back. Back to the day Elena Voss had stopped being invisible. Back to the beginning of how a woman with nothing became the reason a man with everything changed what he was willing to fight for. 16 hours before the diner. Before Nico Marino watched her choose courage over survival. Before the $2 bills fell from her pocket like a prayer. The alarm on Elena Voss's phone buzzed at 5:30 in the morning. Not a gentle vibration. A sharp, insistent sound that cut through the darkness of the converted closet where she slept. The closet was 7 feet long and 4 feet wide, with a single bare bulb overhead and no window. A twin mattress on the floor. A rod above her head where she hung the 3 nanny uniforms that made up the entirety of her professional wardrobe. The walls were white and bare except for a water stain in the corner that had been spreading for 2 months. She had stopped reporting it. Elena did not move for 30 seconds after the alarm sounded. She lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening to the silence of the mansion above her. The Lakeshore Drive property belonged to the Langford family. For stories. 12 rooms. Worth more than $40 million. And this closet belonged to her. She was 27 years old but looked like someone who had lived 5 decades in a much smaller space. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her face upward. Her brown eyes had a quality to them like a candle burning in a room with no oxygen. She wore a faded grey t-shirt that had holes near the hem. On her wrist, she wore a child's bracelet made of plastic beads. Oliver had made it for her in art class. He had braided it himself. She had not taken it off in 3 weeks. Elena stood. Her knees cracked. The cramped space meant she could not fully extend her arms without touching both walls. She changed quickly in the darkness, muscle memory guiding her hands to the uniform hanging on the rod. The black dress was cotton, standard issue for household staff, and it hung on her frame like fabric on a wire. Beneath it, she wore stockings with a run in the left leg that she had tried to stop from spreading with clear nail polish. It had not worked. 5:45. She climbed the narrow service stairs that led from her closet to the kitchen of the Langford mansion. The kitchen was all white marble and stainless steel. Copper pots hung from an island that cost more than the yearly rent on her old studio apartment. The one she technically still rented but could not afford. The one where Anthony Marchetti came to collect payment through methods that left marks only she could see. She did not think about that. She poured the coffee first. Always the coffee. Samuel Langford drank it at 6 o'clock exactly, black, in a bone china cup that had been in the family for 3 generations. She set it on the table in the breakfast room. The table was long enough for 12 people. The Langfords never used the dining room because it was too formal. This breakfast room was for everyday use. By 6:30, Samuel arrived. He was 52 years old, grey at the temples, always in an expensive suit even before dawn. He glanced at Elena the way you might glance at a painting you had owned for many years but no longer truly saw. He Saturday. He drank his coffee. He read the financial news on his tablet. He did not speak to her. At 7 o'clock, Oliver came down. He was 7 years old with the kind of face that made strangers smile. Sandy blonde hair. Blue eyes. The eyes of a child who did not yet understand that the world was designed to disappoint him. When he saw Elena, he ran to her. His arms wrapped around her legs, and he pressed his face into the fabric of her uniform. "Elena, you're my favorite person in the whole world," he said. His voice was muffled. Honest. The kind of honest that only children can manage because they have not yet learned to hide. Elena's hand shook as she touched his hair. She wanted to pick him up and hold him the way a mother might hold a child. The way she never would be allowed to hold him. But staff did not cuddle the children in the way mothers did. This was the understood boundary. She was help. The help should not sit at the dining table. The help should not be too familiar. The help should not create confusion in a child's mind about what role she was supposed to play. "Good morning, Oliver," she said, and her voice was careful, professional, steady. "Did you sleep well?" Samuel did not look up from his tablet. At 7:45, Sophie Langford entered the kitchen. She was 38 years old and looked like she had been assembled from expensive components. Her hair was the color of polished caramel. Her clothes were designer athletic wear that she would never actually exercise in. She was beautiful in a way that made other women feel very small. She looked at Oliver hugging Aria, and something changed in her expression. "Oliver, come sit down," Sophie said. Her voice was not cruel. That was the worst part. It was simply matter-of-fact, the way you might redirect a pet. The help shouldn't be sitting at the dining table. It sends the wrong message. She looked at Aria without really looking at her. It creates confusion about position. Aria stepped back. Oliver's arms fell away from her legs. He walked to his mother and sat in a high-backed chair upholstered in pale grey linen. Aria finished preparing breakfast. Scrambled eggs because Oliver liked them soft. Fresh fruit. Toast cut diagonally the way he preferred. She set everything in front of him, her hands very careful not to touch him. "You've been with us 8 months now," Sophie said to Aria, not to Oliver. "It's working out reasonably well. But we need to maintain appropriate boundaries. Do you understand?" "Yes," Aria said. "Of course." She turned away before Sophie could see her face. Before anyone could see the invisible line that had been drawn, the message that was clear and would never need to be stated again. She was not family. She was not even a person in the same category as persons. She was help. She occupied a space. She performed functions. She did not have a heart that broke when Oliver stopped hugging her. The 14-hour day began in earnest. After breakfast, Oliver was due at school. Aria packed his lunch. Turkey sandwich on whole wheat. Apple slices. A juice box. A note written in her careful hand. "Today is a good day to be kind. Love, A." She had started writing these notes 3 months ago. Sophie had never mentioned them, so Aria had continued. She drove Oliver to school in the second family vehicle, a Mercedes SUV that cost $80,000. Oliver sat in the back in his booster seat because that was what the law required. He was quiet this morning. He knew, somehow, that something had shifted. "Will you be here when I come home?" he asked. "Always," she said. It was a promise she had no authority to make. It was a promise that could be broken by a single decision from the Langfords. But it was the only promise that mattered. The 8 years before the Langfords, she did not talk about. She had been in a shelter for women in those years. A place with grey walls and fluorescent lights and a room she shared with 3 other women and 2 children. She had worked night shifts at a hospital, cleaning. She had survived. That was the word people used. Survived. As if living was an accomplishment rather than a baseline requirement. It was in that shelter that she had found the shoes. A child's first pair of shoes, size 3, blue with white laces. Someone had left them behind. No one claimed them. Aria had kept them in a small wooden box. She carried that box through 7 different apartments. She carried it still. Because those shoes meant something. They meant that she had survived once already. That survival was not new. That she knew how to endure. When she returned from dropping Oliver at school, the morning was ahead of her. Cleaning. Laundry. Organizing the pantry. Mending a seam on one of Sophie's blouses that had come loose. The mansion was silent around her in the way that expensive homes are silent, the sound dampened by money and distance from the street. She moved through the rooms as if she were not quite real. As if she were exactly what Sophie had said. The help. Occupying space but not existing in any meaningful way. At 6 o'clock, the 14-hour day was not finished. Oliver needed dinner. Homework help. A bath. A bedtime story. She sat on the edge of his bed with his small body under a duvet patterned with dinosaurs, and she read to him from a picture book about a bear who was lost and had to find his way home. Oliver's eyes grew heavy. His breathing slowed. His hand, still holding hers, relaxed. "Aria," he whispered. "Don't go away." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. It was the second lie she had told that day. The first had been to Sophie. The second was to Oliver. But lies of comfort are not sins. Or if they are the only kind she could afford. She stayed until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then she stood and moved quietly out of the room. The clock on the wall read 8:19. She had 14 minutes before she was due in the second-floor bathroom to organize the cleaning supplies. The Langfords paid her $800 per month. This covered the rent on the studio apartment she kept to maintain the legal fiction that she was not a live-in servant but a live-in nanny who simply happened to sleep in a closet. The rest of her money, what little remained after rent, went to Anthony Marchetti. Marchetti had started coming to her apartment 6 months ago. Not for rent. Not officially. He had wanted her to understand that the rules of business could be flexible if she made them flexible. The scar on her left shoulder blade was shaped like a crescent moon. She had told no one about it. She had told no one about any of it. By midnight, she was back in her closet. The alarm would sound again at 5:30. The day would repeat. Oliver would hug her and then learn again that this was inappropriate. She would read bedtime stories and make promises she could not keep. And in 8 hours, when she returned to the studio apartment that she paid for with money she did not have, Anthony Marchetti would arrive unannounced, and the invisible walls would close in tighter. This was her life. Completely. It was a life that would have continued until something broke, until the weight of it crushed her spine into dust. But what was waiting for her in 22 hours was a diner on North Avenue. A waitress with tired eyes. A man in a corner booth whose stillness suggested he owned the very air around him. And $2 bills that would fall from her pocket like a prayer onto a checkered floor. At 3:22 in the morning, the fluorescent lights of Sal's diner hummed their constant, dying song. The black and white checkered floor stretched beneath Elena Voss's feet like a chessboard where every square was a losing move. Her uniform hung torn across her left shoulder, and blood, thin, dark, still seeping, traced a map across her pale skin in rivulets that told a story she had never wanted written where anyone could see it. She had stumbled through the door 20 minutes ago, her hand still trembling from the apartment on West Madison, from the hands that had grabbed her, from the voice that said things that made her body forget how to breathe. The diner was nearly empty. A waitress with eyes like burnt coffee stood behind the counter, watching without judgment. And in the corner booth, a man sat perfectly still, reading a newspaper folded into thirds, his movement suggesting he owned not just this diner but the very air suspended inside it. His name was Nico Marino. The Chicago underworld whispered his name the way children whispered prayers before sleeping. Aria had no idea who he was. For men entered through the glass door at 3:37. They moved with the coordination of wolves, shoulders back, eyes forward, expensive suits hanging loose enough to conceal what Aria already knew they carried. The lead man, thick-necked and grinning, scanned the diner and found his target immediately. He crossed the checkered floor. His shoes, Italian leather, cost more than everything Aria owned, clicked against the tile with each step. Aria. Not a greeting. A claim of ownership? Mr. Marchetti's been real patient with you, sweetheart. Time to go home and show some gratitude. He grabbed her arm. His fingers pressed into the wound on her shoulder, and pain shot through her like electricity. A delivery driver stood frozen 2 feet away, his own shirt torn, his eye swollen shut. They had been threatening him. This man and his 3 companions had cornered him near the kitchen, demanding protection money he did not have. Aria's legs felt like water. Every bone in her body screamed at her to comply, to move, to stop resisting because resistance had never changed anything in her life. Her voice emerged as barely a whisper, shattered like glass dropped on concrete. I'd rather sleep on the street. The diner went silent. The kind of silence that arrives before something terrible. Tony and Franco moved from the corner booth without standing. They simply shifted position, shoulders straightening, eyes opening fully for the first time, with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this exact thing countless times before. They did not rush. They did not shout. They simply existed differently in space, and 4 men trained in intimidation suddenly understood they were not the most dangerous people in the room. The lead man's grip loosened. His eyes found Nico Marino, still seated, still holding the newspaper, still looking at the words before him as though the world had not just reorganized itself around his stillness. "Holy," one of the men whispered. "That's Marino." They backed away. Their apologies came fast and meaningless, tumbling over each other like water fleeing down a drain. They left the diner. The glass door swung shut behind them, and the sound of their car accelerating dissolved into the humid August night. Aria collapsed into the booth across from Nico. Adrenaline drained from her body like sand through fingers, and she became aware suddenly of how much she was bleeding, how cold the vinyl seat felt against her skin, how the pain in her shoulder had become a living thing with its own heartbeat. The waitress appeared without being called. She carried ice wrapped in a kitchen towel and fresh napkins, not the flimsy diner kind but cloth ones, expensive, the sort rich people used. She began cleaning the blood from Aria's skin with a gentleness that made tears rise without permission. Nico folded his newspaper. He studied Aria with eyes the color of storm clouds, calculating eyes that seemed to count everything they saw and assign it a value. "You stepped between 4 armed men and a stranger." His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Why?" Aria was exhausted beyond fear. The exhaustion had weight. It pressed down on her chest, on her throat, on every nerve that had learned to stay silent. Because someone should. He did not respond immediately. Outside, a car horn sounded 3 blocks away. A siren wailed in the distance, moving away, unconcerned with the revolution that had just occurred on the checkered floor of a diner on North Avenue. Nico slid a business card across the table. Just a phone number. Nothing else. No name. No title. Just 10 digits that represented something vast and unknowable. "When you're ready to stop running." Aria was too tired to argue. She pocketed the card, and the waitress guided her through the kitchen door into a back room where the smell of coffee and grease faded. There was a small cot, a chair, a window overlooking the alley. Aria lay down on the cot, and for the first time in 8 years, she slept without her body braced for violence. Tony and Franco stood near the kitchen as dawn broke through the diner windows, painting everything gold. "Boss, you want us to handle Marchetti?" Tony's voice was steady but his eyes had changed. Something had shifted in him too, witnessing his employer act as though kindness was a language he had nearly forgotten how to speak. "Not yet." Nico's response was quiet and final. "But make sure she gets home safely." What neither of them knew was that in the office 2 blocks away, Nico had a room upstairs that remained exactly as it had been 15 years ago. A crib with white railings. A mobile of stars and planets turning slowly above empty space. A name he never spoke aloud anymore, Alessandro, written in gold letters on the nursery door. His son. 3 years old when the genetic condition took him. 15 years since the day Nico had stopped believing that kindness could exist in a world that allowed such things. But watching Aria sleep on that cot, her shoulder finally still, her breathing finally deep, something in him had cracked. Not broken. Cracked. Enough for light to seep through. 2 days later, Aria stood in the Langford sitting room wearing the uniform they had provided, her hands clasped before her like a penitent. Sophie Langford occupied the sofa with 2 other mothers, their wine glasses catching afternoon light through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a throne room overlooking peasants. "Aria, we've been discussing your performance." Sophie did not look at her directly. "Oliver has become too attached. It's unhealthy." "He's a wonderful boy," Aria said. "I care about." "That's the problem." Sophie set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "You're the help, not family." We're letting you go. 2 weeks' notice. We'll send your final check to the address on file. The other mothers nodded approvingly. They had never questioned their own children's attachment to nannies. They had never felt threatened by love. That was a luxury poverty did not permit. Aria's world collapsed silently. Without this job, she had nothing. The apartment would be gone. Marchetti would find her. There would be nowhere left to run. For days later, Millennium Park stretched beneath an August sky that refused to break. Aria sat on a bench feeding pigeons with crackers she had taken from the Langford kitchen, her last meal, distributed to birds because it was the only way she knew how to give. Her pocket held exactly $2 bills, crumpled and worn, everything she had left. Oliver appeared with his mother trailing behind, phone pressed to her ear. The boy ran to Aria, his legs still working, still strong, and wrapped his small arms around her waist. "You're leaving because you're not good enough," the boy said. His voice held the literal truth of children who understood the world through what adults said about it. Aria knelt to his eye level. Her voice cracked like breaking ice. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. But you are good enough. Always remember that." She pressed a small wooden box into his hands, the first pair of shoes she had kept from the shelter where she had lived before becoming a ghost in the Langford home. Before becoming invisible. "Keep this," she whispered. "When you feel small, remember someone once felt that way too and survived." Sophie yanked the boy away. "We discussed boundaries, Aria." As they disappeared through the park, a black car pulled up to the curb. Tony and Franco stepped out. Their movements were casual, but their presence carried weight. "Mr. Marino requests a meeting," Tony said. The restaurant was called Mercato, and it occupied the 18th floor of a building that threw its shadow across half of downtown Chicago. Nico owned it outright. Tonight, it was closed to the public. The private back room was lit by amberlight from antique fixtures. The smell of expensive bourbon and leather filled the air like an atmosphere. Nico sat at a table set for two. He did not stand when she entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. Aria Saturday. Her body felt like something borrowed that she had to return. "You helped someone in my diner," Nico said. "You gave your last $2 to the waitress as a tip even though you were bleeding." "Why?" "Because she looked tired." Aria's hands were folded on the table. "Like me?" "I've been making inquiries." Nico leaned forward. The light caught the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone. "Anthony Marchetti has been extorting you for 8 years. Sophie Langford fired you without cause. You have nowhere to go." Aria did not ask how he knew. She already understood that men like Nico knew everything. "Why do you care?" Her voice was small. "I'm nobody." Nico was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, something other than ice entered his voice for the first time. "My son died 15 years ago. He was 3 years old. A genetic condition, something no doctor could fix. I would have given everything, my empire, my life, all of it, for someone to show him the kindness you showed a stranger." Aria saw the grief flash across his face like lightning. It was devastating precisely because it was rare. "I have a proposition," Nico continued. "My associate has a 7-year-old son. Paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident 6 months ago. The surgery that could restore function costs exactly $300,000. The window for the procedure closes in 2 weeks. After that, the nerve damage becomes permanent." Aria's confusion was visible. She waited. "He needs full-time care," Nico said. "He's pushed away 5 caregivers. He's angry. Scared. He's stopped believing anyone will stay. I need someone who sees him, not his wheelchair. $5,000 per week. Private apartment. All expenses covered." The number was so large it seemed impossible. 5,000. Every week. All expenses. I'm not qualified for, Arya began. You're qualified because you care, Nico interrupted. His voice was gentle in a way that made it more devastating. Because you know what it means to be invisible. Because you step between a stranger and violence without hesitation. Tony and Franco exchanged a look neither had experienced in 15 years of service. Their employer, the man they had seen order unspeakable things without changing his expression, was vulnerable. Almost human. Nico slid a folder across the table. Inside were medical documents, surgical reports, photographs of a dark-haired boy in a wheelchair, his eyes hollow with pain that no child should carry. You would care for him until the surgery, Nico said. Help him prepare. Be there for the recovery. His name is Marco. Arya opened the folder with trembling hands. The medical details made her dizzy. $300,000. 2 weeks. A boy who had learned that the world breaks people and never puts them back together. Something broke open inside her. I lost my own child, she whispered. A truth she had never spoken aloud. Miscarriage, 8 years ago. The same week Marchetti first, the same week everything changed. She could not finish. Nico's expression shifted. Understanding. Recognition. The look of someone who understood that grief was currency that transcended class and crime. Then you know what it means to fight for a life, he said. Arya nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. I'll do it. But what she did not comprehend in that moment was that accepting this offer meant entering a world where loyalty was currency and protection came with invisible prices. What she did not know was that the boy's real father was dead, killed protecting Nico, and that Nico had sworn on his grave to care for this child as his own. Nico made a single phone call in Italian as Arya left the restaurant. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of something immense being set in motion. It's time, he said in a language she did not understand. Gather them. Across Chicago, in parking garages and warehouse yards, in the basements of buildings where no one ever came, 20 black limousines began their engines simultaneously, waiting for a signal that would tell them where to move, what to protect, what needed to burn. Arya's hands trembled as she pushed the wheelchair down the long hallway of the medical suite on the 7th floor. The boy in the chair, Marco, 7 years old, with dark curly hair and eyes that held too much pain for someone so small, refused to look at her. His fingers gripped the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. I don't need another babysitter, he said, his voice small and sharp as broken glass. He threw the plastic cup from his lap across the room. It clattered against the wall and fell silent. Arya didn't flinch. She walked to the cup, picked it up, and returned it to the small table beside him. Then she did something no paid caregiver had done before. She knelt down until her eyes were level with his. Good, she said, her voice steady and true. Because I'm not a babysitter. I'm someone who knows what it feels like to be broken. She paused, letting her words settle into the space between them like stones into still water. And I'm someone who knows how to survive it. Marco's eyes flickered toward her for just a moment before he looked away again. Over the next 5 days, something shifted. Arya began reading to him, not children's books with empty happy endings, but stories of people who fell and stood up again. She moved his wheelchair to the window so he could see the Chicago skyline, the way the sun caught the glass buildings and turned them into monuments of light. During physical therapy, when his legs screamed with pain, she held his hand and whispered, I'm here. You're not alone. On the 6th morning, Marco spoke without her asking a question first. Can you braid my hair? Like my mom used to. His voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of 1,000 confessions. Arya's breath caught. She found a soft brush and sat behind the wheelchair, working her fingers through his dark curls with extraordinary gentleness. Her own daughter would have been 8 now. The thought came and went like a ghost that had finally learned to leave her in peace. That same evening, the notification appeared on her phone. $5,000. Nico had kept his word. For the first time in 8 years, Arya could breathe. Not deeply, not freely, but the suffocation loosened just enough to let her believe that survival might become something more. What she did not know was that both her villains were already circling. On the 9th day, Aria returned to her old apartment during Marco's afternoon rest period. She needed the rest of her belongings, the photograph of her lost daughter, the single pair of shoes she'd kept from the shelter, the things that proved she had existed before the destruction began. The door was kicked open. Everything inside was destroyed. Her mattress slashed, clothes scattered like casualties, the few books she owned torn apart. And in the center of the wreckage stood Anthony Marchetti, reeking of whiskey and aged sweat, his face twisted with a violence that had learned to wear itself as casually as cologne. "You think you can just disappear?" His voice was low and wet. He moved toward her, closing the distance before she could step backward. "You owe me, Aria. 8 years of protection don't come free." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The pain was immediate and familiar. She had learned this pain so well she could recognize it in the dark. "I don't owe you anything." She pulled backward, but his grip was a vice. "You're a predator." Marchetti slammed her against the wall so hard the breath left her lungs. His other hand rose, fingers splayed, ready to strike. "You're coming back with me, or I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you really are. A whore who traded favors for rent money. That's your reputation." The door exploded inward. 2 figures moved through the frame like shadows given shape and purpose. Tony was first, his hand finding Marchetti's collar and twisting fabric and skin together. Franco came second, taking the raised arm that had threatened to strike, bending it backward until Marchetti's knees buckled. "Mr. Marino sends his regards," Tony said. His voice had no emotion in it, it was the voice of someone who was simply delivering a message. Marchetti began to scream, but they were already moving him toward the hallway. That same evening, a different kind of predator arrived at Nico's restaurant. Sophie Langford walked through the lobby in a cream-colored dress that cost more than Aria had earned in 6 months. Her blonde hair was perfect. Her smile was sharper than any blade. "I need to speak with Elena Voss," she announced to the hostess, her voice carrying the entitlement of someone who had never been told no. Aria was standing at the bar when Sophie found her. The recognition was immediate and cold. "I know you're working for some criminal element now," Sophie said, her eyes moving over Aria like something checking inventory. "I've called Child Protective Services. A woman with your background, your history of instability, you're a danger to any child." Aria's hands clenched. But her voice, when it came, was steady. "You fired me because I loved your son more than you do." Sophie's face flushed red. "How dare you? I could destroy you with one phone call. I have lawyers, connections. My family has been prominent in Chicago for 3 generations. Who do you think they'll believe, you or me?" A voice emerged from the private dining room. Calm. Measured. The kind of voice that made the air itself seem to hold its breath. "Mrs. Langford. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Nico stepped into the light. He wore an open white shirt showing his chest, a tailored suit that cost more than a car, and an expression of absolute quiet certainty. Sophie's face drained of color. "You. Marino," she whispered. "And you've been harassing someone under my protection. That's unwise." His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did. "I suggest you leave Chicago. Tonight. With your son. And never contact Aria again." Sophie backed toward the door, stammering, her empire of threats dissolving into nothing. That night, Aria stood on the apartment balcony. The city stretched below her like a living thing with 1,000 heartbeats. August air pressed down, humid and heavy, and then the rain came. Fat drops that smelled like concrete and electricity and regret. Her hands gripped the railing. 8 years crashed over her like a wave, Marchetti's invasions, Sophie's cruelty, the child she had lost, the scars on her back that would never fade, the voice inside her that whispered over and over that she was worth nothing, deserved nothing, would always be nothing. The rain soaked through her shirt. She thought about stepping up onto the railing. The thought was quiet and insistent, like a friend who had been waiting for her. Then, through the open balcony door, a small voice called out. "Arya? Are you there?" "I had a bad dream." One small voice. One child who needed her. She stepped back from the edge, water streaming down her face mixing with tears, and went inside to the boy who reminded her why survival matters. The next morning, Nico made 2 phone calls in Italian. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of something immense being set in motion. 12 men in black tactical gear moved like ghosts through Chicago as dawn broke. They arrived at Marchetti's apartment building as he was leaving for his rounds. He saw them and tried to run. Tony caught him by the collar and slammed him against a black SUV. "You like hurting women who can't fight back." Franco opened the back door. Inside sat Salvatore Donodi, head of a rival family known for cruelty that made other men's violence look like nursery games. Marchetti's face went white. He began trembling like a cornered animal, like something that finally understood it had nowhere left to run. "No, please, Marino can't do this, I'll disappear, I'll leave the city." "You're not dealing with Marino anymore," Tony said. "You belong to the Donodis now. They have special plans for men who prey on the weak." Marchetti screamed as they dragged him into the vehicle. The door closed. The SUV pulled away from the curb. He was never seen again. Rumors circulated of a man matching his description working as forced labor in a warehouse on the Canadian border, forever looking over his shoulder, forever afraid. Meanwhile, at 9 o'clock that same morning, FBI agents arrived at Sophie Langford's Lakeshore mansion with a warrant. She was hosting a charity brunch for 20 wealthy donors. Cameras from Society magazines were there, capturing the arrival of federal agents in dark suits with expressions of absolute professionalism. "Sophie Langford, you're under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and embezzlement from the Children's Charity Foundation," the lead agent said. His voice carried no judgment, only fact. Sophie's mouth fell open. "This is absurd. I have lawyers. Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are. We've been building this case for 8 months. Anonymous tip gave us everything we needed." She was led out in handcuffs past gasping donors and flashing cameras. Her empire of social standing crumbled in real time. Her husband filed for divorce within hours. The evidence was irrefutable. Sophie had stolen $2.7 million from her own charity, funds meant for underprivileged children. Federal prison. 40 years. Too quick, too easy, too merciful, but systematic destruction nonetheless. Arya watched the news coverage from the apartment balcony. Nico stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. The evening light caught the city and turned it golden. "Justice isn't always loud," he said. "But it's always certain." Below them, Chicago moved forward. The rain from the night before had washed the streets clean. Somewhere in the building, Marco slept peacefully. And Arya, who had once stood at the edge of everything with her last $2 and a broken heart, finally understood that survival was just the beginning. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. 2 weeks. 14 days from the moment Nico's doctors declared the surgery possible to the morning Marco would be wheeled into the operating room at Northwestern Medical Center. The antiseptic smell hit Arya the moment the elevator doors opened on the surgical floor, sharp, chemical, suffocating. It coated her throat like a lie. She held Marco's small hand as nurses in blue scrubs checked monitors and adjusted full lines. The boy was 7 years old but looked smaller in the hospital bed, his body swallowed by white sheets that crinkled with every movement. "Arya, what if I don't wake up?" Marco's voice trembled like a leaf in November wind. She knelt beside his bed. Her calloused fingers brushed his forehead. "You will wake up. And you're going to walk, Marco." "I know it." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen you fight. I've watched you try things that terrified you. I've seen your courage." She swallowed hard. "And because I'll be right there beside you every single day, no matter what happens." Even if the worst thing in the world occurred, I would still be there. Marco's eyes closed as the pre-surgery medication began its work. His breathing slowed. His grip on her hand loosened but didn't release. She sat motionless, watching his chest rise and fall, counting each breath like it was currency she couldn't afford to lose. The surgery took 7 hours and 32 minutes. Aria counted every one. She paced the private waiting room that Nico had reserved on the 5th floor, a space with leather chairs and windows overlooking Lake Michigan. She didn't eat. Didn't sit. Didn't allow herself to hope too loudly. At hour 4, Nico appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything she'd owned in her entire life. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes, his storm-grey eyes, showed cracks. He sat across from her without speaking. "You should be somewhere else," Aria said. "Running things. Making decisions. Marco is the only decision that matters." His voice sounded different in the silence of the waiting room. Smaller. More human. "And you're the only person I trust to care about him the way I do." She looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who commanded fear in Chicago's darkest corridors had spent the last 2 weeks learning Marco's favorite books, sitting beside him during physical therapy, holding him when the pain got too sharp. "His father was my best friend," Nico said. "Antonio Rossi. We grew up together in the neighborhood. Built everything together." He paused. His jaw tightened. 3 years ago, rival family made a move. Someone tried to shoot me outside a restaurant. Antonio stepped in front of me. Took the bullet meant for my chest. Aria's breath caught. He died in my arms on a cold concrete sidewalk, and his last words were about his son. "Take care of him, Nico. Promise me." So I promised. Nico's fingers wrapped around the coffee cup. Then 6 months ago, another accident. A car hit us. I was driving. Marco was in the back seat. The impact crushed his spine. And I realized that all the power I had, all the money, all the men willing to kill for me, and none of it meant anything because I couldn't fix him. "That wasn't your fault," Aria whispered. "It was my world that hurt him. My enemies. My choices." His eyes met hers. "Until you walked into Sal's diner bleeding, and I watched you stand between those men and a stranger you didn't know, and I understood something. I've been building an empire on fear and control. But I couldn't control this. Couldn't fix him. Until you gave him something I could never give him." "What did I give him?" "Hope." The word fell between them like a stone in still water. "You looked at a broken boy and treated him like his legs were going to work again. You didn't pity him. You didn't whisper when he was near. You just saw him. All of him." The surgical wing doors opened. A surgeon in blue scrubs emerged, mask hanging around his neck, exhaustion written across his features. Aria and Nico stood simultaneously. "The procedure was successful," the surgeon said. "The nerve pathways were intact. The compression has been relieved. He's going to need aggressive physical therapy over the next 6 months, but all indicators suggest he should regain full mobility. We won't know the exact timeline until he wakes, but the prognosis is very good." Aria broke. Not sobbing, not dramatically. Just tears sliding silently down her cheeks while her hands covered her mouth. Nico's composure shattered at the exact same moment. His shoulders curved inward. His breathing stopped for a full 3 seconds. Tony appeared in the doorway, and when he saw his boss's face, when he witnessed Nico Marino's tears, he withdrew quietly, understanding that this moment belonged only to the 2 people who loved the child most. That night, while Marco slept in the recovery room with monitors beeping softly around him, Nico led Aria to the hospital's rooftop. The August humidity had broken. The Chicago wind carried the smell of lake water and distant rain. Stars pierced the darkness above the skyline. Nico took a folded paper from his jacket pocket. A bank statement. An account in her name. $300,000. I can't, Arya said immediately. This is wrong. I didn't do any of this for money. It's not payment. It's partnership. He turned to face her fully. The vulnerability in his expression was devastating. Marco needs you. Not as a nanny. Not as an employee. As someone permanent. As family. And I? He paused. The admission cost him everything. I need you too. The words hung between them, heavy with all the unspoken understanding of two people who had survived different kinds of darkness and recognized the darkness in each other. What are you asking? Arya's voice barely disturbed the night air. Stay. Not in a room in my house. Stay as someone who chooses to be here. As someone who belongs here. His hand extended toward hers. Family isn't always bound by blood, Arya. Sometimes it's built by people who choose to stand beside each other when the world is burning. She looked at the city lights stretching across Chicago, then back at Nico Marino, a man who could destroy empires with a phone call but couldn't save the boy he loved without her. She nodded. One small movement. One choice that changed everything. 6 months later, Marco's 10th birthday party bloomed across Nico's private estate garden. Streamers in gold and blue twisted between oak trees. A cake shaped like a soccer ball waited on a table draped in white linen. Marco ran across the grass on legs that worked perfectly, his laughter sharp and pure and free. He was chasing Oliver Langford, the Langford family's youngest son, whose grandmother had reached out to Arya after Sophie's arrest, asking if she would consider seeing the boy. Arya couldn't say no. The child had suffered enough loss. Arya stood beside Nico, watching both boys tumble together in the grass, their friendship forged in the shared understanding that families break in different ways but can be rebuilt by people who stay. Nico took her hand. The gesture was still new enough to make her breath catch. They'd grown slowly into this, shared breakfasts, late-night conversations on the balcony, his confession of everything he'd survived, a revelation of every way the world had broken her. He wasn't the man who commanded fear anymore, not entirely. And she wasn't the invisible woman who'd given her last $2 in a diner. They were something new together. You gave everything, Nico said quietly. That night, you had $2 and a broken heart, and you still stood between those men and a stranger. Arya smiled. And you sent 20 limousines. She paused deliberately. Well, actually you sent 12 men to systematically destroy my enemies and offered me a home. Close enough. Nico's laugh was rare and genuine. I don't do anything small. As the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Marco ran to Arya breathless from play. He tugged her sleeve. Mama, watch me do a cartwheel. The word stopped time. Mama. Not Arya. Not the nanny. Mama. She froze. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. Marco looked worried he'd made a mistake. Say it again, she whispered. Mama, watch me. She pulled him into her arms, breathing in the smell of grass and childhood and everything she'd thought she'd never have. Oliver joined the embrace without invitation, understanding somehow that this moment belonged to all of them. Nico's hand settled on her shoulder. Tony and Franco appeared at the garden's edge, ruffling the boy's hair with surprising gentleness, these men shaped by violence but choosing love for this family. A family not bound by blood but by choice. Not built in the light but forged in the darkness and carried into the sunrise. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Sometimes your last $2 becomes the first step toward everything you were meant to have. Sometimes the man in the shadows sees you clearer than anyone in the light. And sometimes what arrives isn't 20 limousines at all. Sometimes it's something better. Someone who sees your worth when you've forgotten it yourself. Someone who builds a home from your broken pieces. Someone who stands between you and the world that tried to destroy you. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember their own worth. Subscribe because tomorrow we're bringing you another story about the moment everything changes. Comment below, what would you do with your last $2? We read every single comment. This is the channel where every story reminds you that your value isn't determined by what you've survived, but by who you choose to be when survival is no longer enough. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. After the rain, the sky always clears. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.